My name is Leah. You know my last name, but I've asked you not to share it. I would appreciate it staying that way. The people in my life who know the true story know enough already, and the people who don't know it do not need help putting it together. I'm only telling this at all because I've spent too long carrying it by myself, and because if even one person hears it and decides not to ignore the warnings around certain places, maybe some good comes out of what happened to my brother and me. I was 29 when this happened. I'm 36 now. I live in Arizona, and this happened in Arizona too. Out in a part of the state where the land opens up into high desert and broken hills and dry washes that can look beautiful in the day, but ancient at night. I'm not going to say exactly where. Some of the people around there would consider that place private. Some would say more than private, sacred even. And before anyone says it, yes, I know how that sounds. I know that saying a place is special or sacred makes it sound like I'm already preparing you for a supernatural story. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to explain why we were there and why, even now, I'm careful about how much I say. At the time, I worked in patient scheduling for a medical imaging center in Flagstaff. It wasn't hard labor, and it wasn't glamorous. It was phones, insurance codes, irritated people who thought getting angry at me would magically open an MRI machine faster, and the kind of fluorescent lit routine that makes every day feel like a copy of the one before it. I was organized, skeptical, and not especially mystical about anything. That was my personality then. Maybe it still is in some ways. I made lists. I liked explanations. I thought most stories people told about strange things in the dark were either exaggerations, misunderstandings, or a couple of bad decisions mixed with too much fear. My brother, on the other hand, was the kind of man who never met a bad idea that he didn't want to walk a little closer towards before deciding that it was actually bad. For the sake of this, his name is Daniel. He was 32 then, older than me by 3 years, and worked welding maintenance for a construction outfit. Where I was careful, Daniel was restless. Where I liked plans, he liked impulse. We loved each other, but we were different in nearly every way that siblings can be different, while still carrying the same laugh and the same last name, mixed in with the same stubborn streak that we got from our parents. The reason we went there had nothing to do with camping for fun. Our father had died the year before. He wasn't old, just one of those brutal middle of life losses that knocks a family off center. While sorting through his things, our mother found an old map folded inside a metal box. It marked this remote parcel of land our father used to visit when he was younger with his own father. It wasn't land we owned, more like a place they had access to through an old handshake arrangement with somebody who had long since died. Next to the map, in my father's writing, was a note about an old storage cache that he had left out there once, with a line in the shack. He thought he might come back for it. He never did. Daniel got it into his head that the cache might still be there. Family papers, maybe, old photographs. My father hadn't really been the sentimental type with most objects, but there were pieces of his younger life where he had kept close and never explained much about. Daniel wanted to see whether anything remained before weather or time or trespassers finished off what might be there. I said it was probably long gone. He said maybe. Then he said maybe not. Then he asked me to go with him because I was the one Mom trusted not to lose my head, and because it was a way to kind of touch base with our dad again. I'm not gonna lie, I missed that man more than anything. Going out there sounded like maybe I could get some kind of closure, or at the very least, feel a little closer to him. But I should have taken all of that as a bad sign. We left late on a Saturday, because Daniel had to work half a day. By the time we reached the old turnoff and followed the rough track far enough in, the sun was already starting to go down. We found the shack, or what remained of it, on this little rise above a dry wash. It was one of those half-collapsed desert structures that looked more like a memory than a building itself. Three walls, mostly intact, one corner gone. Part of the roof sagged in. It was definitely too dangerous to sleep in, and too unstable to do much more than poke through carefully. We searched until the light got thin. Most of what we found was junk. There were rusted tools and broken enamelware, empty feed stacks turned into stiff rags by age, even a cracked lantern. We did find a busted trunk, but there wasn't anything in it but a rat's nest and dust. If there had ever been anything worth driving out for, either somebody had already taken it or time had eaten it away. Daniel got quiet after a while. He didn't want to admit that he'd dragged me somewhere just for disappointment, but I told him it was okay. The drive back in full dark over those roads would have been stupid. That wasn't fear talking, that was just a simple fact. There were washouts, loose rock, stretches where the track narrowed along drop-offs or bent through dry creek beds. So we decided to stay the night and leave at first light. We weren't expecting some magical camping in the desert experience. It was just a practical choice, and I still had that thought that maybe something like this would bring us closer to the memory of our dad. We had a small tent and a cooler, folding chairs, a camp lantern, enough food and water for one night without any trouble. We set up maybe 30 yards from the old shack where the ground flattened out and a clump of juniper gave a little shelter from the wind. The truck was parked nose out toward the track for a fast departure in the morning. I remember being annoyed at myself for not wearing warmer layers. Desert nights lie to people when you haven't spent enough time in them. The afternoon can bake you, and the evening can still come for your bones. Dinner itself was nothing fancy. I packed stuff to make some pretty good sandwiches, but that was it. There were chips, canned tea, a packet of jerky that Daniel brought without telling me and then acted like he'd produced it by magic. He was such a boy, just bringing a bag of jerky when I brought all the other food. We talked about our father for a while, which was rare for us. You see, grief had made us both go off in different directions. We just dealt with it in different ways. But out there, it was like it felt easier to talk about him. We were just sitting under a dark sky with this old shack that he had a history with. It'd been just us and the memory of our dad. It felt nice out there. By 10:30, we had settled into the tent. I remember that part clearly because I slept badly almost from the minute I zipped up the flap. The ground was hard underneath the pads, not soft like sand, but there was some little roots and stones that kept finding my hip no matter how I turned. Daniel was beside me, already drifting off in that maddening older brother way where he could sleep through weather, traffic, probably the end of times if they didn't begin early enough. I must have dozed eventually because the next thing I remember is opening my eyes to darkness and hearing the truck door chime. It wasn't the alarm, just that stupid little interior chime that goes off if a door opens with the key still in it. It sounded once, then again. I lay there blinking, trying to decide whether I had dreamed it or not. Beside me, Daniel whispered, "You heard that too, right?" There was a tightness in his voice that I didn't like. I pushed myself up on one elbow. The tent was black except for the faintest wash of moonlight through the fabric. I listened. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then came a soft metallic clink from somewhere outside, like somebody setting something down on the truck bed rail or knocking lightly against the cooler latch. We both stayed still. Then something moved through the gravel by the front passenger side of the truck. It was this slow, crunching walk, measured and heavy enough that it sounded human at first. I remember thinking exactly that somebody is out there with us, and then feeling anger before fear. I thought we'd been followed somehow, or that another person had come out there and found us. My first instinct was more irritation than terror, but that changed fast. A voice called out from outside. "Hello?" It was a woman's voice, not far off, maybe 15 or 20 feet from the tent. "Hello? I need help." I froze. Daniel grabbed me and whispered, "What is that?" There was something strange about the voice from the first word. I could hear the shape of the sentence. I could hear the tone that it wanted to have, but it felt wrong in the details. Like somebody doing a nearly perfect imitation of a real person without understanding how breath and emotion actually fit together. This was too careful, too placed. And then the voice came again, a little nearer. "Can anybody hear me?" I whispered, "Don't answer." In that little bit of moonlight, I could see my brother nod. It went quiet for a moment. We just sit there holding our breath, listening as well as we could. And then the footsteps resumed. circling the tent more widely. We could hear the crunch of the gravel, and then a pause, and then another crunch. A brush of something against sage or dry grass or whatever was out there. The sound moved away, then seemed to come from the other side of the truck without ever making a full path there. I felt my skin go cold. Not just fear cold or desert night cold. It was the kind of cold you feel when you know that something just isn't right. Before I could answer my brother, after he whispered to me, "That's not right," the same voice called again. Only now it sounded different, lower and firmer. The exact same words, but it was like all the softness was stripped out. "Hello? I know you're there." Daniel grabbed my wrist. I put my hand on his. It wasn't just that the tone had changed. The voice itself had changed. The way a person's voice might change if you pitched it through a machine and tried to sand human edges off of it. I knew then I did not want to unzip that tent for anything on earth. The thing outside began moving more confidently after that. It walked close enough that I could hear breathing. It wasn't deep or an animal in any type of way. This was odd. It had a catch to it that sounded almost like whatever had made that sound had remembered the rhythm of breathing that the way people do, but it was still having a hard time imitating it. And then it spoke in my mother's voice. "Leah!" I slapped my hand over my mouth before I could make a sound. I knew that that was not my mother. She was home, asleep in a subdivision an hour and a half away. She didn't know where we were. None of that mattered to my nerves. Hearing her voice in that place, in that dark, did something to me I still can't describe without feeling stupid afterwards. My body reacted before logic did. My chest tightened, my eyes filled with tears. For one awful second, some ancient obedient part of me wanted to answer because that was my mother, and she was calling my name. Then the voice came again, and the falseness of it showed. "Leah, where are you?" Not how she would say it. Not her rhythm, not her tone, just close enough to hurt and make me think that it might be my mom. Daniel's grip on my wrist tightened. I could feel him shaking. And then, worse than my mother's voice, a second later, we heard our father's voice. He'd been dead for a year. There was no way on God's earth he could be calling to us. That was the moment that terror changed shape for me. Up until then, part of me had still been trying to make room for a person outside or a prank, maybe some grotesque animal sound I was mishearing. I know that was a long stretch, but the human brain does weird things in situations like that. But when I heard my father's voice ask for us, ask what we were doing out there, those thoughts died. The voices started coming from more than one direction after that. Like one thing moving fast enough or throwing sound strangely. It seemed to be everywhere at once. It didn't sound like there was more than one of those creatures. It sounded like that thing could just move around with no regard for logic or physics. My mother's voice, my father's, a woman I thought might have been my aunt for 3 words before the cadence went wrong. Daniel sucked in a breath beside me and whispered, "It's doing yours too." And then I heard my own voice. He was right. How I couldn't understand that that thing was imitating me at first, I will never understand. Maybe I was in shock, but he was right. "Daniel!" It came from outside, on my side of the tent, just close enough to make the fabric seem impossibly thin. "Daniel, come out here, I found something." It sounded like me in the same way a reflection in a bad carnival glass looks like you. All the parts were present, but none of them sat right. Daniel said, with real fear in his throat now, "I'm not going out there." The voice laughed. I think whatever that thing was hurt him, even though he was trying to be as quiet as possible. But that laugh, it didn't sound like me. It didn't sound like anybody. Just one dry little sound dragged through a throat that didn't seem built for human speech, yet was using human speech anyway. The first physical attack wasn't even on the tent. It was on our truck. Something hit the side of the bed with a hollow, metallic boom that made both of us jump. Then another hit. Then a dragging scrape along the rear panel, slow and hard enough that I knew it was leaving marks in the paint. You could hear the truck rock. It wasn't violent, but it was enough that the suspension gave a little. If it wrecks the truck, we're screwed, Daniel said, not even trying to whisper at this point. Outside, that thing moved fast again. It was like this series of impossible bursts, gravel kicking, brush brushing, then silence, then suddenly a new position near the old shack. I risked pressing one eye toward the tent seam where the zipper didn't fit perfectly flat. I saw movement for half a second. A tall shape crossing between the truck and the broken wall of the shack. Upright, fast, large. The moon caught part of a shoulder and the side of a head that was not human-shaped, and then it was gone. This thing moved incredibly fast. That glimpse and the way it moved didn't help me at all. It just confirmed that whatever was outside was not simply a voice in the dark, and I could no longer deny the fact that this was not a prank. And then it began attacking the camp. And the way it did it was methodical. Something heavy dragged our cooler way across the dirt in a series of jerks and pauses. I heard the metal grate from the little cook stove scrape over rock. A folding chair went over and bounced once. Something rattled through our gear, like it was sorting just by touch. And then a rock landed on the rain fly overhead and rolled down the side. Another rock followed, and then another. It wasn't thrown hard enough to crush through, just enough to make us feel the impacts and imagine what was choosing that pressure. It's messing with us, Daniel said. I knew that. I understood that whatever was out there was enjoying this. A moment later, a hand. Yeah, a hand. I swear on everything. I know it was a hand. Slid under the edge of the rain fly at the far side and lifted it a little. It wasn't enough to peek open the tent, just enough to show that I could get under there if it wanted. And then that raspy laugh sounded again. This thing was enjoying itself. It was having fun. The fabric bowed inward. I heard claws tick lightly against one of the stakes, and then it let the rainfly drop. Daniel made the sign of the cross in the dark. He'd not done that since we were children. The thing went still after that, and the silence was so scary. It was like we were waiting for that thing to attack. It let us listen to our own breathing for maybe 15 seconds. Then something leaned near the tent wall by my feet and exhaled. I could feel hot breath through fabric. I jerked so hard I kicked Daniel in the shin. That skinwalker or monster or whatever it was inhaled again. It was like it was savoring the scent that it could get from us. Then it moved off. The voices came back almost immediately, though. This time it used our voices again. It started with my voice. It was farther off now, near the front of the truck. Come here. Then Daniel's voice from the other side of the camp. I'm over here. Beside me, the real Daniel said in a shaking whisper, how is it mimicking our voices? And then from somewhere beyond the tent, his voice came again. Just unzip. It'll be fine. Come out here. I grabbed his forearm so hard I'm sure that I left marks in it. There are fears that make you want to flee and fears that make you want to stay perfectly still in the hope that invisibility might somehow return a childhood power. That second kind had me completely by then. I didn't want to unzip that flap for the life of me. I barely even wanted to speak. I just wanted to hide under the sleeping bag until that thing went away. But it didn't. It stayed there. And then it made this screaming sound that I will never forget. That sound tore across the campsite so abruptly and so close that I felt it through the ground and the air both at once. This was not a coyote or a cougar in heat. Not anything normal. It had something cat-like in its upper edge and something human in the middle, and then something completely inhuman under all of it. The sound went on long enough to become unbearable and then cut off so cleanly that it left my ears ringing. After that, It rushed the tent. Something hit one side low and hard enough to drive both poles inward. The wall bowed towards us almost to our faces before snapping back. Then it hit another side near the head, not enough to collapse it, but enough to send a rain of dust and grit down from the seams. Then a violent rattling at the front where the guy line went taut and started to pull. I thought it was going to uproot the tent and drag us around like trapped animals. Daniel shouted then, not even words at first, just panic and fury mixed together. I started screaming too. We yelled at it to leave. We yelled prayers. We yelled nonsense. Everything came out ugly and desperate and human. The thing outside answered in a voice that was none of ours. Not my mother, not my father, not me or Daniel. It was a voice like leaves dragging through a throat. Maybe that was its real voice. It said, "Nobody called you here." There was a second of silence, and then it said it again, right up at the seam of the tent. "Nobody called you here." I remember my whole body locking up at that sentence because it was worse than some generic threat or some fake voice. This felt specific, personal. This thing was angry. It was angry that we answered some call that we never had permission to answer, it felt like we were on its territory, looking around its things. I was so scared at that point that I started to cry. Not sob, just this silent, fear-induced cry. Daniel whispered for me to shut up. He wasn't angry at me. I think he was just scared that that thing would sense that fear and try to get to us. Outside, the creature began moving around again. There were heavy steps and breath. The gravel was shifting again. You could see shapes passing across where the moonlight streamed through the sky. It was lower at the edge of the tent wall. The proportions were wrong enough that I nearly stopped breathing when I finally caught a glimpse. You could see long, powerful legs at some points, but these straight, long areas on its back, like it was sloped and running on its hands and knees. It would be there, and then it would be gone, and then it would dart right back. It came back to the truck next after that. We heard the driver's side handle lift and drop like it was trying to get in. Then the passenger door on the other side. Then it was messing with the hood. We heard a scrape down the windshield like fingernails. Then one slow knock, knock, knock on the roof over the cab. This was as deliberate as any person trying to get your attention at a window. It wasn't trying to tear through everything in blind rage. That's when I realized that this thing was smarter than we were giving it credit for. This thing was doing all of this on purpose. What its game plan was, I don't know. But I know that it was having fun, and it was playing with us. At one point, Daniel whispered that maybe we should run for the truck if it moved away again, but there was nowhere to run if the truck wouldn't start or if it got to us first halfway across the open ground. So I told him no, absolutely not. Even then, in the middle of that dumb old sibling rhythm tried to surface. He told me that I needed to be brave. I told him that he needed to shut up, that I wasn't going out there. I think that maybe was the only thing that was keeping us sane for a few more minutes. Just arguing, feeling ourselves there together. And then the creature pressed against the backside of the tent. I could see the fabric bow inward, feel the weight of the tent start to shift. There was this slow, terrible shape like something leaned into it from behind and remained there, just putting absolute pressure on the fabric. I saw what I swear to this day was a hand spread across the nylon. 5 long fingers ending in hook tips. That's the clearest visual that I got all night. The hand stayed there for 3 or 4 seconds. I wanted to bat it away. I wanted to find something to stab through the fabric and try to wound this creature, but I knew that if there was a hole in that tent, it might use that to shred it open, and then we wouldn't know what it was going to do to us. But the time that hand was there was long enough for me to register the size. I could see the outline of knuckles, the length of the fingers, and the impossible human structure underneath whatever that thing had that passed for skin. Then it slid away downward with a faint rasp. I think that was when I started to cry even harder. Tears were just flowing freely at this point. The next thing it did was almost more disturbing than anything else. It started to whisper. It wasn't talking loud anymore. It was right there at the side of the tent, right near the wall at my shoulder. It was in my voice this time. I can see you. I turned my head so fast I almost hurt my neck. Daniel heard it too and pulled me backwards. And as he did, he made this noise that rattled me to my core. This tiny, involuntary sound like somebody had jabbed him with a needle. It was a noise I'd never heard him make before, and I realized that even there, even though I looked up to my big brother and knew that he could protect me, this situation might be different. Neither one of us might get out of this. And then, after that, it used his voice again. Leah, don't move. This went on and on. Bursts of noise, then quiet. Aggression, then stillness. The creature would manipulate the edges of our world just enough to keep every nerve awake. It would drag its nails on the truck or push the tent pole. It would use a voice from one side and then another voice on the opposite side. I want to stress to you how long this torment went on for. There was one horrible laugh that sounded like a half-dry cough and a half-whisper. Once, something brushed over the top of the tent with weight that made the poles bend, and I thought that it had dragged a hand or a forearm along the ridge line. At another point, we heard movement at the old shack, and then something metallic ringing from inside it, like whatever was out there had gone into the ruins and found something loose to play with. Then it came back again, fast, circling, making us doubt whether it had ever really left that immediate camp area at all. Somewhere in the deepest part of the night, I remember telling Daniel that if daylight came and gave us even 60 clean seconds, we were leaving every single thing there and never saying another disrespectful word about warnings that we didn't understand. He said yes immediately. There were no arguments, no jokes, no Daniel to it, just agreement. Eventually, and I don't know when exactly, the activity started to thin. It didn't stop all at once. It was like it slowly lifted, little by little. The voices seemed to get further apart. The footsteps moved wider around the tent, and the truck noises ceased altogether. Then there came one last scream from somewhere behind the shack. It was long and angry. After that, the quiet that settled felt different, like that thing had finally vacated the area. But I didn't trust it, and neither did my brother. We stayed exactly where we were until the black inside the tent softened into gray and I could finally make out his face. He looked terrible. He was pale and sweaty. He looked shocked in a way that made him seem younger and older, all at once. It was like that night had aged him and had shown him something that shouldn't be real. And that fear tapped into some part of his childhood. I imagined I looked the same, though I never asked how I looked. When the light outside got strong enough to show real shape through the fabric, we unzipped the tent a few inches and listened. We didn't hear anything. We came out slowly, ready to fight if we had to, both of us carrying whatever passed for protection. Daniel still had the revolver that he brought for snakes and coyotes. I had the camp hatchet from the woodpile, but neither felt like enough after what we experienced. The campsite looked wrong. It wasn't destroyed in some wild rage sense, more like it was rearranged. The cooler sat on the hood of the truck. One folding chair was upside down in the bed. Our shoes were gone from beside the tent and later turned up in the bed of the truck too. The stove grate was by the shack. The lantern was by the passenger side of the truck. There was nothing around that could give us a solid idea of footprints, but the ground around the tent and the truck showed tracks that were too disturbed for me to make much of. We didn't search for more than 30 seconds. We stuffed what we absolutely needed to into the truck, and then we got out of there. Neither of us said a word on the first part of the drive. We simply had nothing left in us that words could do any good with. For the first couple days after, we barely spoke to each other at all. Part of it, I believe, was simple shock. Part of it was that neither of us had language for what had happened, and saying it out loud too early took a risk of making us sound insane even to ourselves. And we couldn't exactly go to our mother and tell her what happened. So I did what most people like me do when our reality breaks and there's no obvious adult in the room to repair it. I researched, obsessively. At first, I approached it like I was an investigator. Mountain lions, people messing with remote campers, audio hallucinations from lack of sleep, shared panic, predators known to mimic. I knew even then, while typing some of that into the search bar, that I was reaching. But I needed to rule out things in a human order before I accepted anything else. After I figured out that none of that stuff was going to explain what happened, I moved into stranger territory. Folklore, desert voice mimicry stories, encounter reports from the Southwest. I didn't want to believe in monsters, but there was nothing else that I could go for that would explain it at this point. I read for weeks. Forums, regional stories, old books, listened to interviews, watched YouTube videos. I learned very quickly to be careful and respectful because some traditions are not mine, and I do not pretend otherwise. I'm not here to lecture anybody about beliefs that I wasn't raised in. I can only tell you what I found and how it fit the shape of what happened to us. The mimicry, those borrowed voices, even from my dead father. That sense of being taunted rather than attacked. The weird half-seen shape that I still don't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me or if that was the actual shape of it. Eventually, after enough sleepless nights and daytime nightmares and reading enough that my search history probably looked like I was going insane, I chose the word Skinwalker. And I don't come to that lightly. In fact, I still use that word carefully. But it's the closest label I've found that fits the encounter. It's just the only name that keeps circling back around and fitting more pieces than any other. My brother hates that word. For me, I have to use it because if I'm going to talk about this, then I need to use the one thing that fits the bill. You're probably wondering why, if it was so aggressive, that it never simply ripped into the tent and killed us. I don't know. I've thought about it more times than I can count, more times than I probably should have. Maybe it couldn't. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe terror was the point. Or maybe there's rules. Maybe we survived because something got bored, or because dawn was coming, or because some scrap of grace still exists in the world and was standing watch where we couldn't see it. Or maybe my dad was there with us that day. Maybe he was there to protect us. Maybe he kept that thing from getting into the tent. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't claim to have any of the answers. I just know what I saw, and I know what's lurking out there in the dark.